Hey everybody, P.J. Turner, executive producer and host of your Break It Down show. Today's guest is a guy named Ken Ungar. Go to LinkedIn and look up Ken. Ken does a lot of interesting stuff. He works in sports and marketing and naming things. So like the Conseco Field House and all the RCA Dome, all these kind of things. He's one of the guys that works on these kind of packages for companies. He's worked with the Indianapolis Speedway. We talk a lot about racing because he's an Indy guy, but just in general, the concept of, how does a brand pay for things and get access to put their name on stuff, because branding is such a big hot topic, but he's been doing it for 30 years. So I think you'll enjoy this more business focused things as we try to get away from the COVID topic so exclusively and just, kind of get back to our normal survey of things. I've got some really, really, really exciting shows lined up. So I know you're going to love Ken. And when you can, try to support the show with some shares, buy the t-shirts. I'm thinking about bringing some more products in, but in general, these are the things that help us out. Also, when I put out the links for books or whatever, that's our affiliate link that does it. So not only does the author get a little bit of money, but we get a little taste of that as well. So when you can, let me know. And I'm glad that if you got a product you're going to get from Amazon, hey, I'll stop what I'm doing and I'll send you a link. So that's another way to support the show. It's just these small things. If you watch on YouTube, I think I've up to like $3 in revenue now. So it's small things like this, though, that add up and turn into like, hey, look at this. We made $150 this month on YouTube. Hey, we made $150 on Amazon. So these are the small things that are starting to build into bigger, like, more frequent drops, not streams, but drops. And so that's how you can help us, is just think about when you're going to get something on Amazon, or if we're promoting a particular product, support those products, support those brands, support those authors. Authors, really, it's fantastic when you guys write reviews, because that is something that I can send to the PR folks and say, see, because I'm telling you right now, that stands out. If you write a review, let me know. That is a big thing on Amazon. All right. One last thing to say to you before we get over to Ken Ungar. And I just think the world of Ken. I can't wait till I got to Indy this summer, and I'm going to go meet that guy, because I think it's neat what he does and who he is. And he actually is a fan of the show as well. So, hey, Ken, what up? Save the Brave, savethebrave.org. If you're going to do something with charity, we would ask that you support us. But if not that, just try to give charity more often. And if you're not sure what to do, here's what you can do. You can always give charity as a gift. Go to CharityOnTop.org. You can buy a charity gift card. So basically, let's say you wanted to, I want to do something nice for my friend who helped me move. The other day, we moved a shed in our backyard. Let's say we wanted to do something nice for everybody. We buy everybody a sandwich. Everybody gets a $10 gift card that has charity on it. They can then take that charity gift card and donate it to any one of 1.8 million different charities. And it's actually the least expensive, most direct, biggest bang for the buck that you can do for a charity, because if you send them a check, they've got to process it. This one comes already processed. So it's a really good way to give and do something special. CharityOnTop.org. All right, here comes my man, Ken Ungar.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Morata.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi, this is Ken Ungar, and you're listening to the Break It Down Show.
Hey, Ken, I've already gotten better at this whole StreamYard thing. This is a new addition to the show. I didn't realize you also knew when we went live. And so it's great to have that, boom, right back to the beat of the show. It's great. First off, thanks for coming on. COVID crazy. Here we are, still able to record things. And I appreciate your time.
Hey, it's great to be here, Pete. I'm going to have fun, I'm sure.
We were talking off mic before this morning when I was doing some background on you, and you were talking about how your dad said, you just can't hold a damn job. You tried to be a lawyer, you tried to do the safe route and become a government employee and do your 20 plus years and retire easy, but no, not you.
I tried, and my mom even cried the day I told her I wasn't going to be a lawyer anymore. So I was a real disappointment to my parents. That's a fact.
That is hilarious. So you disappoint. What kind of lawyer were you going to be?
Yeah, it was funny. So when I was in college, I had this idealistic notion that lawyers did these incredible things to save the world. So I went to law school and found out when I got out that wasn't quite the case. So I spent about 5 years practicing corporate law. And it ended up that, law is a great profession. A lot of people do a lot of great things with it, but I seem to spend day and night helping companies fight with each other. And it really didn't produce anything that mattered in the end. So after about 5 years of it, I sought greener pastures for my life.
Where were those greener pastures?
Yeah, so I ended up doing. I didn't do 20, but I did do 4 years of public service. I worked in state government in Indiana. I was the deputy chief of staff to the governor of Indiana. So all of a sudden, I find myself 30 years old. I'm essentially the chief operating officer of state government, 32,000 employees, and a $14 billion budget. And I'm 30 years old. So it was diving in the deep end. But I'll tell you, it was 4 years that were absolutely incredible. And that was really what it was about, because I spent every day helping people, although it was quite a ride during those 4 years, I'll tell you.
Did you need a law degree to do that job?
No, really, it was my way to kind of segue from law, which, obviously is, kind of based in legislation, all this kind of stuff. But I was really trying to make my way to business. I have both political science and business degrees, undergraduate, and I decided early on that I really felt my calling was in business. So that my government gig was kind of my way to move more towards management. And I'll tell you what, acting in that COO role in state government with an organization that size, that really, that showed me two things. One, it showed me how little I knew about business, but it also showed me that was a place where I could really create new things and help people. And so that was a great segue out of the law gig and into something more business oriented.
Why didn't you stay there?
Yeah, it was interesting that particular opportunity came to an abrupt end because in Indiana, the governors are term limited. So it was 2 terms only. So this was his second of 2 terms. So my governor went on to greener pastures. So there I was, about 34 years old, looking for another job. And this is where the hand of fate kind of came in. Because people right now, I work in sports marketing, and people ask all the time how I got into sports. There are a lot of people who actually want to be in sports. So they say, well, how did you do it? Well, I'm at the end of my state government years. And back when I was an attorney, I had a client for the owner of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Did a pretty good job. We became friends through the process. Fast forward the end of state government. This individual, whose name is Tony George, he was looking for a position in his organization called chief of staff. And he knew me from my lawyer days. And he said, well, deputy chief of staff and chief of staff, that sounds like the same job. So he asked what I knew about auto racing and sports. And I said, well, pretty much nothing. He said, that's fine. I'll teach you the sports part. You help me run my business, which obviously I knew how to do at that point. So that's how I made that leap from state government to sports. And I've been there ever since. So that was an interesting kind of weaving tale of how I got to where I am now.
Yeah. It's an interesting way to do this. So let's back up for a second. How sweet is this? So first off, being from Indy and you get to do anything with the track, that's got to be like boyhood dream come true.
Yeah, that was really an incredible experience because even kind of when I was a lot younger, I'd spend too much time at the track, hanging out with friends, drinking a beer or two. But to actually work there, right, and to actually be able to drive on the track in a pace car and to be right there with the races. And I remember literally my first day on the job. I show up not at Indy, but at that time we were racing at the Walt Disney Speedway, the IndyCar series at the time, what was called the Indy Racing League. So I show up at the track, and within 5 minutes, I met AJ Foyt, Johnny Rutherford, Tom Sneva, all these guys who from my childhood were the heroes of auto racing, Mario Andretti, all these people that were the heroes of racing. I meet on my first day in the job. So I'm like, wow, this might be pretty cool.
Yeah. How were those guys? Like, so let me back up. The saying, and I forget who said it. Someone out in the East Coast, they said, "Don't meet your heroes." But I continue to do it here on the show, and I'll be damned. They're great people. Just
It's incredible,
you know,
right?
yeah. How were AJ and the boys?
Yeah, they were awesome. Kind of a lot of the stories you hear are true in terms of how AJ Foyt is kind of his own guy and he calls it
Mhm.
like he sees it. Johnny Rutherford, like the ultimate class act. All these guys, they kind of WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. And
Mhm.
it was great meeting my heroes, and they definitely fulfilled my expectations. And just their knowledge of racing, and especially back then when they raced, they were hanging it out. It was about as seat of the pants, literally, as you could get. And so for those guys to tell the tales of what racing was back in the 50s and 60s and 70s was absolutely incredible. And here I am, a young 30-year-old guy, wet behind the ear, not knowing anything, um,
Yeah.
and being new to sports business. Boy, did it open my eyes! But it was a wild ride. There's no question.
You look at what it means at Indy to let it all hang out. And I'm looking, I don't have, I couldn't pull this up, but I do know quite a bit about this racing. AJ Foyt set the lap record in 76 at 186 miles an hour. Now that was for the year. John Cock had gone faster. Wally Dallenbach had gone faster. But you think about the level of safety 10 years prior to 76, and there was none. Like it was
Right.
just, you're in the car going as fast as you dare. And so 10 years later, yeah, they're wearing helmets and the cars are a little safer. It's nothing like today. And not to take away what these guys do today. I mean, the cars are now literally too fast for the track. They have to limit them. But you think about what it means for guys like, and Mario Andretti's in the same area doing 193 around that track with just nothing to protect them at all compared to what would happen, 20 years later.
Yeah, I mean, just the phrase "letting it all hang out" was so true back then. I mean, even a seatbelt in the race car in the 50s and even early
Yeah,
60s was not really kind of a standard thing. We think about today,
yeah,
we get into our sedan, we get into our Honda Accord, and we put on a seatbelt. But these
yeah.
guys are going that 150, 60, 78, 200 miles an hour. Absolutely incredible. And I was actually there at an interesting time because, here it is, kind of the mid 90s, early 2000s. Drivers were getting hurt. And it was just at the time when we could really leverage technology to
Yeah.
really make racing a different sport. So, for example, during that time, we really questioned, drivers crash into walls. A wall is really hard. Can we change the dynamic of the wall to save
Right.
lives? And so during that time, this what's called the safer barrier, or a soft wall, was created so that when race car drivers crash, it doesn't necessarily have to be life ending, or even
Right.
doesn't have to be serious. They don't have to incur serious injuries. I mean, so during that period when I was there, it was just when we were using technology to really make racing safer, and that was a cool part of what was going on at the time.
By the way, the record has held since 1996, and it was on an upward trajectory. But Eddie Cheever Jr. at 236 miles an hour.
Yeah, incredible. And I happen to think so. It's like 236, 237. The drivers were skirting with that speed at the time. I
Yeah,
think that short of some brand new technology, that's going to be the upper end, because drivers say that even at that speed and beyond, weird things start to happen to the human body, including your peripheral vision narrows substantially. The G
yeah.
forces are too much at that point. I think that without additional technology, that's as fast as we're going to see for a while.
If memory serves, I think it was when the Vegas racetrack first opened. They had basically just made it just a giant bowl, and they realized that it wasn't tenable for humans to drive that way for very long. So they had to detune the track because just the constant G forces and everything else. It was going to be dangerous. And look, let's understand this: drivers will race; they'll go do it, and most of them will be fine. But you can't have folks blacking out from G-force and fatigue, and that's what's going to happen there.
Exactly. So that was happening, and so the kart series at the time, that was happening to the drivers. So to hear them talk about it, So in an oval track, there's typically 4 corners. So they were going into 1, coming out of 2, and they were not waking up until 3, going into 4. So because the G forces at that point decelerate, it was a scary circumstance when you're thinking you're going at that speed and you're out. So that I'll tell you, the technology, so detuning the tracks, detuning the cars, kind of doing what they need to do to decrease G-force and really not let the technology exceed human endurance. That was incredible.
Yeah, it makes for different racing. Let's not just say better, but different racing, because now you do have to deal with the team dynamic and some race strategy a lot more. I mean, if you just pound your car for 2.5 hours and go 500 miles, something's going to break on a lot of those cars, and that's usually what happens. But what you don't want is, driver fatigue causing fatalities and taking out other drivers and all those kind of things.
Right. And I think that in terms of the history of the sport, that was kind of the end of the massive speed dynamic,
right?
Where it's just faster, faster, faster. At that point, it was like, okay, we've gone as far as we could go. And you're right, the strategy, the pit stop strategy, kind of the team dynamic, it was, how do you make your driver the ultimate athlete? So instead of this kind of overweight beer swigging kind of driver who's getting behind the wheel, these guys became like the ultimate athletes, and so did their pit crews. So you have pit crews getting trainers, and how do you make a 13-second pit stop into a 12-second pit stop, and but the strategy, whether it was a fuel strategy or whether it was the speed of your pit crew, it put so many new dynamics into racing. I think like late 2000s into the next decade really became very exciting as a sport.
Yeah. And the other thing about racing, especially road racing, I'm thinking about Formula One in particular right now, is it becomes about these micro nano moments of the race that you're able to stack. Michael Schumacher, among other things, was great because he could drive 2-footed, and that conversion from, by the way, for folks who don't understand, he's driving a 3-pedal car, it has a clutch that's manual. And so dancing between the clutch, the brake, and the gas, there's a lot of times when all 3 pedals are depressed at the same time. So being able to drive the accelerator with the right foot and the brake with the left, it just takes away. Just think about how much time it takes to put your foot from one to the other. It's nothing, but 500 times over the course of a race, it becomes something. And it's those things that really is what we're trying to measure, is who can do that ballet. At least I think so.
Yeah, my dad, as a matter of fact, used to drive like that. He said it was either taught by a race car driver or a New York City cabbie. So he really mastered that 2-pedal heel toe. But like things like that make all the difference. And so hand-eye coordination. I mean, they often compare race car drivers to Air Force pilots or Navy pilots. Who have this incredible hand-eye coordination, or today a video gamer. So it's really that hand-eye thing that separates the good race car drivers from the great race car drivers.
It's funny you mentioned that, because there clearly is a link, and we just had a guy named T-Mac on, and he's a Top Gun graduate, F-18 pilot, former Marine, and they've built and this is perfect for you. This will transition us into your marketing stuff, but they've built I guess it's augmented reality. So you put on this visor right inside the airplane, you're actually flying the airplane. So you have to feel the G-forces, and they put a virtual plane out in front of you. Maybe it's an adversary, maybe it's a squadron mate, maybe it's a tanker, but you can actually, while you're flying over Santa Barbara, you can practice these maneuvers in real time with like real physical stress. And it's just a remarkable thing. So obviously the military applications are wonderful, because an F-18 is a race car in the air. It's always braking, just like race cars. People understand race cars are always in some form of disrepair. Like they're always in needs of being fixed, whether it's a battery box cable that wasn't tightened before the race, or, some doohickey flappy jabber falls apart. That's how airplanes are. So you're always braking these things as you race them at the limit in the air to become a better pilot. And the other thing is the person being chased isn't working on being a great pilot. They're working on being a rabbit. And
exactly.
So with with this virtual form of training, you're able to get up in the air with less damage. There's no chase plane. And also AI makes the chase plane harder to catch all the time without beating up a pilot, without overworking because that crew, as you said, they've got to be athletes too. It's remarkable what technology is bringing us, with these kind of advancements. And I know it makes sense. Like if you could go out and physically race your car around Indy and get your laps in with traffic around you, you really could get a lot of benefit without everybody wrecking each other's $1 million race cars.
Yeah, exactly. You see that, and that's kind of the typical dynamic that we've seen right over the last 30, 40 years is that technology is pushed to its limit for military applications. So you have, the pilots being trained with VR and AR and then even adding, AI into the mix to really create that lifelike training experience. But like you said, at less cost and less risk. Well, then eventually that technology gets cascaded out into the commercial market. And so what you see is that technologies like that, so that technology exists now in racing.
Yeah.
There are massive simulator experiments going on. One is going on in the US at the Dallara chassis factory in Indianapolis. The other is at Honda Performance Development in Brownsburg, Indiana. They have seriously complicated simulators. But then if you look like consumer grade, which is not consumer grade from 10 years ago, but it was probably the military of 10 years ago. It's my point. Things like the iRacing application. You have race car drivers who are using this iRacing application. They have $20,000 rigs with a lifelike pedal set, lifelike steering wheel, driver seat, multiple screens surrounding, and they are doing actual training. So rather than fly out to the track in Sonoma, California, you could spool it up in the simulator and you are literally driving a precision military GPS grade track, the Sonoma track in your simulator. So no need to travel. Again, no need to, the expense of a crew, going cross country, risking your equipment on the track, but getting that training experience, just like you said, Pete, with the military doing that now. It's really incredible how far that technology's gone.
Yeah. And also, by the way, as a guy that's driven his race car across the nation several times, the trailer breaks, the drivers make mistakes, the drivers of the rig, they don't lock something down, something gets stolen, and then you get to the track and have to pay to get on it. I know these big teams don't, they don't have a problem with that kind of money, but they always are looking for ways to save money and being able to you remember when Dale Jr. was like, I'm practicing on just straight up video games,
right,
on road racing.
Right. And that also reminds me of the joke, right, of owning a team, because the expense, they say, how do you make a small fortune in racing? And the answer is start with a big one. So all you know is you're going to spend money on broken trailers or crashed trailers, or typically we'll hear there's a trailer burning on the side of the highway and all my race cars were in it. And so kind of expense is the name of the game in racing, unfortunately.
Yeah. And that's the God's honest truth, because I've driven our race car out to Wisconsin and out to Florida, and we were in an old RV that had no power at all, but it was what was going to haul the race car. And we overload our trailer because you're going across country and that's what you have to do. And so as we were coming up the Sierra going east, the thing was doing 15 miles an hour and had like a 150-gallon tank. So we had to stop all the time. So I start doing the math on how far we have to go and how many times we have to stop. And just in stopping, we had 4 hours, because to fuel this thing, so the fuel opening and the tank were about 15 feet apart, and it sat level. So you had to crib the RV up so that it was nosed, like we had to park on the best hill we could get at the pump, drive it up onto blocks so that we could get the gas to flow and fill it all the way up to the top of the nozzle. It was crazy. And then at one point, middle of the night, we're driving, and two of us are asleep in the back. Back in the RV, like you kind of face each other and you sleep sideways on your little tiny bed. Well, Tony was driving. He hits a cattle grate and launches the R. This is straight out of vacation. Launches the RV into the air, and the trailer follows. And I look at my friend Jeff, and I'm flying in the air. I'm like, "Hey, boom!" And we broke the trailer, but had no idea. We'd like broke the frame of it, and so we blew out. And I'm going to say the word 22 tires, if memory serves correctly, over the next several thousand miles of driving around, and thousands of dollars of. We could have bought a whole new trailer.
That is a National Lampoon movie.
It totally is. Yeah, it totally is.
But you know something there, you know, the thing I really appreciate about racing is there are thousands of stories like that, because it's not about NASCAR or IndyCar. There are thousands of people every Friday and Saturday night who are driving their race cars somewhere around the country to go racing. SCCA, NHRA. There are people who make that part of their lifestyle. I never appreciated how many tens of thousands of people do that on any given weekend.
Yeah. And my guys, we're like Lemons racers. So we take these discount endurance racing things. And it is such when you have a team that gets along, which is part of the whole process, it's just such a wonderful thing. At the race we went to after we jumped the car, I was driving and the rear left wheel came off of the car, so another problem with it. Like, it was like, it never ends. And it's part of the hilarity, and the suffering is part of the whole thing,
It is. That's the experience, right? But the joy of victory, though, when you cross the finish line first, that makes it all worth it. You forget all the rest of the stuff.
Yeah. I want to quickly get into this, and then I really swear we're going to get into the marketing side of things. But also, one of the topics we've explored here on the show is the optimization of humans. So, Formula One, it's pretty much no holds barred. I mean, there's some, restraints you have to stay within, but it's pretty much no limit racing. And I think at some point we're going to get to no limit humans, whatever the sport is, because we can already do it. I mean, with epigenetics and peptides, you can avoid all of the other stuff and get the most out of yourself, which is not a possible self through just the regular eating good food. Like, this is a whole different thing. We're really going to be able to build and optimize a person for very specific tasks. Yeah,
optimization and the chase of it has been really a part of racing, honestly, since the beginning. Quick story, the Indianapolis 500 is 500 miles because in 1911, consumers didn't believe that an automobile could actually go 500 miles.
Wow.
So they created a race just to prove that. But ever since then, all the technologies are about eking out that extra optimal efficiency to get that extra second. And Formula One, you're right. Formula One's kind of the ultimate kind of expression of that, with hundreds of millions of dollars spent every year trying to find that technology. But you're right, Pete. I mean, from a human dynamic perspective, that chase began some time ago in terms of how can you optimize the human side of that. So from a processing speed of, kind of what the brain can do, and the reaction times and endurance and all these different physical variables, how can you control them and optimize them to make the ultimate athlete machine?
Yeah. How can you? And we got to the point where the car not only made it 500 miles, but you could pretty much go foot to the floor for 500 miles. And that probably happened 40 years ago, you know?
Right.
But now we're pushing the human machine, as we talked about earlier, to the very limit of what they can withstand.
It's really incredible, and we're seeing that across all sports, right? Not just auto racing, and it has its limitations. So I spent some time. I've been an NFL contract advisor and worked with clients in the NFL, and the NFL, as well as other sports, have very strict chemical standards in terms of doping and all those different things to avoid performance enhancing drugs, which can change the dynamic of what really can a human do organically. And so you really have, I mean, all of sports is kind of grappling with this. Yes, we're trying to optimize the human body, but how far is too far, and what is fair and unfair, right? Because if you the racing example and the human example have parallels. If you have the money, you can afford the technology, but
Yeah.
is that really fair?
Yeah.
And so this notion of fairness in sport is so important that all these sports are grappling now with the chemical dynamic as you try to optimize a human being
Yeah.
chemically. It's fascinating. It's only going to get worse.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Well, and certain things are not performance enhancing, but that includes things like stem cell treatments. It includes things like putting dead people's body parts in your body to fix your knee or your elbow or whatever. And these are things like, okay, if this is okay, why not that? So the if then test is being sorted out because like I didn't get injured. I avoided the injury by taking this substance, which allowed me to stay on the field. Is that a bad thing? Is that performance enhancing? Because we literally, like the Dodgers have started to say, we've done an MRI. We understand that this is not, it's a pre-strain, and so now they'll rest someone then. Well, they're not really hurt. Yeah. Well, they're not hurt. It's
Right.
just we're preventing a bigger injury,
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here, and if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
Right.
Just we're preventing a bigger injury,
Yeah, there's this real tension because you have doctors, you have scientists, you have all this research going on that end. And then you have on the sports side, you have all the competition directors for the various sports are trying to keep up with that technology, but by definition, they can't because it's all happening in the private sector and they only kind of end up seeing it once it's on the field and actual competition. So it really is kind of this arms race of optimization. And I see some sports are really good at kind of managing that, and other sports are always playing catch up.
Let's go into the marketing side of things because that's ultimately what you do and why you're here. Let's talk about your company first.
Sure. So I am the president of a company called Charge. We have clients across the U.S., but we are based in Indianapolis. We help companies with sponsorship marketing. And what that is either if you're a brand like McDonald's or Coke or Honda, we'll help you with your sponsorship in terms of making the most of that, whether it's in sports or the arts or not-for-profits. Or if you're what we call a property, like the Indianapolis Motor Speedway or Major League Baseball or some other sport or not-for-profit, we help advise them on what's the best relationship to create a healthy sponsorship, which is really all about how do you create positive energy and exposure for both the brand and the property.
So what does that mean in terms of why does a track just not do that itself? And what do you guys offer?
Yeah, it's gotten really complicated over the years. So sponsorship actually is a pretty old marketing technique, and kind of some historians say goes all the way back to ancient Greece. And so it's been around for a long time, but basically what it is, there is somebody who is spending money, right, to be associated with somebody else's brand. So if you're a racetrack, for example, we'll stick with auto racing for the moment. If you're a racetrack, right, you want to have a sponsor, there's a company out there who will benefit by being the official soft drink of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Why?
Right.
Because the Indianapolis Motor Speedway has great affection in the hearts of fans. People have come to that racetrack for over 100 years. They love it. It's part of their family. And so because they have great affection for that institution, that sports facility or that sports league, that rubs off on a sponsor. So if you're a Coke, if you're Pepsi, if you're a beer brand, if you're any variety of kind of company, you will benefit by being next to that sports league or that sports event. We call that image transfer. Like the good feelings that you have for that sport will rub off on that company. And so as a result, people will consider you as well as they consider the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and potentially they'll buy more of the stuff that you're selling. Now, over time, it's gotten to be pretty complicated, right? Sponsorship agreements could be, 20, 30 pages. It could be very complicated. But also, if you add in all the stuff that goes on around it, the advertisement, the public relations, the being at site for experiential marketing, those displays and all of that. And what rights do you have and not? And how do you stop people from ambushing you at an event? And all these different things, it's become super complicated. So what happens is, whether you're a sponsor or whether you're a sport, you end up coming to an agency like ours to help you sort that out, really to help you. How do I get the most out of it? How do I spend the least money? But more importantly, how do I connect with an audience? How do I connect with those fans in a way that they'll think better of me for sponsoring a sport or an event than if I didn't?
You guys out there in Indy have a basketball arena called, it used to be called Conseco Fieldhouse.
Right.
Does that work? I mean, we've seen so many of these things. First off, so many of the naming agreements for stadiums in general have equated to the company ultimately couldn't afford it, But Conseco Fieldhouse is interesting because I don't know what Conseco still is. I don't know what it stands for. I know it's an acronym. If I didn't look it up just a second ago, I wouldn't even know it's a securities company. But does it work for a Conseco to do something like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. There are so many different kinds of sponsorship, right? So that happens to be like the title of a facility. And you'll see kind of, especially NFL and NBA facilities, they'll run anywhere from $1 million to sometimes $10+ million per year. Well, why are people paying that? Right? That's a lot. That's a lot of money. Why are people paying that? Two things. Yeah, I mean, it's incredible when you think about it. With all the needs we have in society, somebody's shelling out that kind of money to simply stick their name on a building. It's because when they create that kind of connection with a facility, two things happen. One is you get associated with that facility. So from a name ID perspective, every time. So we'll take. I know you're based in California, so let's use the Honda Center as an example. So every time someone says the Honda Center, ka-ching, that's more awareness for Honda in terms of what it does. So the thousands, tens of thousands, millions of times people say, "Hey, I'll meet you at the Honda Center tonight for the Ducks game." That's a value. Then because you're affiliated with someone like the Ducks, people are going to think better of you. Remember, we talked about kind of that image transfer where the good feeling you have for that hockey team or going to that facility will rub off on that sponsor. So really from a name ID perspective and from, kind of the brand awareness and the improvement in the brand that you consider as being part of that sponsorship, it's worth it for those companies. Now, the dynamic, sometimes what happens is what you said, Pete. If it's repeated without context, so today the Conseco Fieldhouse is called Banker's Life because the company changed ownership and changed brands. But if you keep saying Conseco without context, like what the heck it is, then it's just the name of a place. It's not the name of a company that's spending a lot of money to have its name in that facility. So we call that leveraging or activation. You've got to do something else besides just let your name sit on something. So you've got to be out there telling your story. Again, that's what an agency like us we do. We help those companies tell the story, because if you don't, then the Conseco Fieldhouse is just a place on Pennsylvania Avenue in Indianapolis.
Well, and the other thing is when you name something that already had a name, like when they were going to sell the name to Soldier Field and Chicago said, no, you're not. Like, it's a monument to World War I. Let's get this. So and they worked around it. Citigroup presents this thing. So you add a few extra words. But also in Chicago, the new Comiskey, which hasn't been called New Comiskey in 25 years, has been called a lot of things. US Cellular, if that's even a company anymore, they bought the rights. But people didn't want to call it that. They wanted to call it something else. And so they would say the Cell. There are a number of people that called it the Joan because Joan Cusack was the spokesperson for the brand at the time. And so here you have, like, you spend $10 million a year, or whatever.
Right.
And you can't get people to say the damn name because they hold it against you, That's
the crazy dynamic, because again, the one of the rules that I have in sports is the fans always win. Right. So they're going to call it what they want to call it and what they've been calling it for years. And once an association is made in someone's mind, I mean, we have the same thing here. So what was the first major stadium in Indianapolis when we stole the Baltimore Colts was called the Hoosier Dome. It became the RCA Dome. And then it was demolished and moved across the street, and now it's called Lucas Oil Stadium. People still call it the Hoosier Dome.
Right.
So, and guess what? They're right. I mean, because in terms of association that fans have in their minds, that is the biggest risk in sponsorship. So when something has been named something else and you're taking it over, big risk. You better be ready to plan for that. And really, you better be ready to embrace fans and kind of coax them gently into thinking of it differently, or they're just going to do what they're going to do because fans always win.
Yeah, it's like Mile High Stadium when they built a new one. They're like, this is called Mile High Stadium.
Right.
It's
And will always be called Mile High Stadium, right?
Right. You can put another name in there, but we're going to call it Mile High. You know? I think the most ubiquitous one, the one that worked really well that comes to mind is Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. We never called it just Wild Kingdom. And then if someone slid a Mutual of Omaha document across the table to say, hey, buy this insurance, I would have to think that you're like, oh, I love these guys. Yeah.
Exactly.
Marlon Perkins.
Marlon Perkins, right? I mean, but that's it. That's a great example. Kind of back in the day when sponsorship of radio and TV was so prevalent and so important. It is associated. That name got bolted together. And if you said to, have you ever watched Wild Kingdom? People wouldn't know what they think it's an attraction at a Disney park, right? They'd have no idea it was a team. But Mutual of Omaha, right? It was fantastic. It put that company on the map. There are other examples of that, but that's the power of sponsorship, right? Once you create that association, and although you're paying money, you're getting a lot more benefit because it's free. Here, how long has that show been off the air? And you and I are still talking about it.
Yeah. Well, I think about it all the time. It's such a great example of that, you know, and because as a podcast producer, one of the things I try to give my clients, or I try to like make the hurdles known and go, this is not a hurdle. This is a hurdle.
Right.
Like treat this problem this way. And so one of the things is naming things. Everybody wants to come up with the perfect damn name for everything. And so it's okay, if you're going to be a niche and you're going to say something great, but understand you're going to have at least two brands you have to support because you're part of the brand and then your show. So is it the Ken Ungar show? Let's just call it that and be done, you know?
Right.
But it's not what I do. It's the sports marketing, you know, charge. Okay. Here's what we're going to do. So and I'm asking now, do you know the Turkish word for victory?
I don't.
But I know you know the Greek word for victory.
I don't.
It's Nike.
Right? Right.
And so in Turkish, it's Ziffer. And Ziffer is a good root for a lot of victories for a lot of places. So if you really were going to name something and have the name be ubiquitous, you would use that Ziffer word because it's probably the word in 25 different languages. Some form of that word would be very familiar. But that's not what happened. And they took the Nike name and they made it something way bigger than Greek victory, you know?
Right, exactly. But kind of what you point out is so important, right? Because there's an art to two things. There's an art to naming from a marketing perspective, because it's got to be something that's organic and authentic and resonant, right? So there's kind of that part of it. And then when you connect it with something, which is kind of what we do in terms of sponsorship, that connection also has to be organic and authentic and resonant, because if you put two things together that should not be together, people go fraud, and they reject it. It is done for. So you got to name it right, and then you got to connect it right. So you kind of you nailed it, Pete. I mean, that's exactly the challenge.
Yeah, because you know, and I guess like Kodak is a ubiquitous word because it's the same, and it's a made up word. So you could do something like that as well, but Kodak didn't become Kodak on day one. They had to go out and do a lot of marketing and being excellent at what they did, you know? So these naming things are a thing, but what I encourage my clients, it's hard enough to make a podcast go past 10 episodes. That's already not going to happen, right? You're already past like, this isn't going to happen. So don't let naming get in the way of getting going and getting to episode 8 and going, whew, okay, do we have 2 more in us, you know?
Yeah, you know, we tell kind of our clients, athletes who we've represented, all that, when they're talking about making content, make the content focus on that, make it resonant, kind of make it connect and engage and kind of make it interesting and compelling. Don't worry about all the wrapping around it, right? Because in the end, people are going to watch a video if they find it engaging. They're going to, they're going to follow a Twitter feed if they really connect with it. That's what you focus on. So I completely agree. If you're talking about a podcast, it's got to be compelling. That's why I listen to your show. Seriously. There are all these different guests. They come from all these different perspectives. I never know what I'm going to get. It's like Forrest Gump and that box of chocolate. You never know what you're going to get. But you know it's going to taste good. So, I mean, it's all about really that content. If it's compelling, the name and everything else will, will sort itself out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for the compliment. I mean, that's great to hear because, a lot of folks who try to figure these things out will say you need to niche, but I don't think so. Our niche is we illustrate life, and you don't know life is a box of chocolates. I hadn't made that connection until right now. And I love to try different chocolates. And I know that there are people like me. I mean, I am my person from my show. I am the audience. And so there are a lot of me out there. I'm not that abstract, in the bigger form. So why not go out and find things that just blow my mind and incredible people and just give people enrichment by illustrating life.
Yeah.
So that's my niche.
And that's an incredible niche. And I think I'll go one step further. I'm not your publicist, so I'm your guest today. But what I find about your show, when you say break it down, I mean, although we talked about that, the name isn't everything. What I love about the name, you do break it down. And no matter who's on, kind of it's that box of chocolate variety. But what I know is your guest is going to break it down. Like I listened the other day to your show with Frank Shamrock. Oh. And like he really broke it down what it means to be a UFC fighter, especially, he was in the dawn of what's kind of modern MMA. And so he broke it down. That was interesting. And all your guests kind of do that same thing. And that's what audiences want, right? It's compelling and it has variety. So it's kind of like, if you nailed it, keep doing it.
well, but we're gonna. Let's get back a little bit into what you guys do then. I mean, we've talked a lot about like the philosophy behind it and the approach and everything. And I love the thought of context, like how do I become contextually part of this thing? Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. Yes. Conseco Fieldhouse. And how do I even say it? I have to learn. I know to say Conseco, but back then when they named it, I was going to say Conseco because there was a baseball player named Conseco.
Right.
So I got distracted with my Conseco reference, but let's talk a little bit about when you know what? Let's not do that. I saw a video of you in Las Vegas on TV talking about social media, and this goes back way back in terms of social media, but really it's just a handful of years ago. So back in 2014, you were on talking about the importance of tweeting and these kind of things. How has that marketplace, and again, just for the audience, for point of reference, 2014. So we're well past the explosion of Twitter. We're still all figuring out what to do. But now here we are 5 years later, 6 years later. How is it different now?
Yeah, it's really incredible. And I don't think a lot of people, especially if they're early in their career in marketing, appreciate this. Because, I approached it remembering pre-social media. So my sons are digital natives, right? I mean, they never knew life without it. But if you go back to 2010, which is only 10 years ago, so it wasn't a novelty. It was kind of becoming generally accepted then, and being pretty widely used. But from a sports perspective and an athlete perspective, it was hit or miss, right? You might have an athlete who was an early adopter. Shaquille O'Neal was he understood, how to use social media early in his career. But then you kind of fast forward to 2014 when I did that television interview in Vegas that you referenced. What happened then is it really became an important tool. So you were seeing social media that went on during a sports broadcast. If there was back and forth interaction between the event and the fan and other fans, it would raise television ratings by 20%, right?
Wow.
More people would watch an event because there was social media chatter behind it than if there wasn't. So at the time, we were kind of urging athletes, hey, listen, you got to get in your game, not only on the field, but you've got to up your social media game. And we were telling them that. And even at the time we were seeing, so we were representing NFL athletes, and I was losing deals on behalf of NFL athletes because my player only had 100,000 Twitter followers. And somebody else's player, had 500,000 Twitter followers. So you had these managers of endorsements that were making decisions based purely on the size of the Twitter audience. Wow. I mean, so now you go forward today, and some of the greats in their sport, whether it's soccer or F1 or American football, if they'll have 5-10 million plus. And they can move audiences with that, meaning that the people who love them and are devoted to them today in 2020, you can move audience to action through what you put on social media. And so as a result, you have brands paying some of these athletes $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 per tweet just to talk about the relationship between that athlete and a brand. So social media, so in that 10 years, it goes from basically, I might do it, I might not in 2010 to now incredible power. The athlete that can do that has incredible power to move markets and move audiences to action. So it's like what we tell clients is the smart ones engage and the ones who want to miss the bus don't.
What if you work for an organization, like I'll say Sports Center is dying. They are not the thing they were 10 years ago. They're not the thing they were 5 years ago. And people just watch it less and less. As a podcaster, when I reach out, I purposely don't reach out to ESPN folks because for the most part, they're not allowed to talk at all. And they're very siloed in terms of what they do. And at least I think to this day, but it used to be a lot of teams didn't want you tweeting from the bench or being active on social media because it creates a big problem for them because they don't control it and people do dumb things on Twitter.
Yeah, we see that a lot. In fact, there's a couple issues, really interesting issues in there, Pete. So, for example, and this is not knocking ESPN. It's a fantastic organization, and
sure,
it changed the way we consume sports, no doubt. Yeah. But today, this market is so fragmented. I mean, if you look at ask a sports fan where they get their daily when you're not in the middle of a pandemic, ask them where they can consume their sports information, and they'll give you a dozen different places. Some might be TV, but more likely it's social. It could be web. It could be Bleacher Report. It could be ESPN. It could be Fox Sports 1. It could be NBCSN. There are so many different ways. This market is so fragmented that the days of Sports Center, because I used to listen to Sports Center on radio and watch it on TV because I had to, right? That was the one place where I'm getting my daily information about what's going on in the sports world. Nobody needs to do that anymore. And ESPN's reacting to that. They're trying to be all those different sources and places to intercept fans who are they're getting their information off fantasy football, right? They're getting injury reports. And now with gaming, they're getting they know when players are injured before some of the news outlets know when players are injured.
Yeah.
So you've kind of got that aspect of the social media world going on. And then you're right in terms of the use of social media. We've seen circumstances just in the past week or so where athletes can scuttle their entire career with a bad tweet, right? One bad tweet. And so what we've done this for college athletic departments. We've done this for professional athletes. We'll have a social media 101 where it's really, you're kind of, and it's difficult because a lot of the times these athletes, especially now, they're 18 to 25 years old. Again, they're digital natives. They grew up with this. So they're like, what are you telling us about? What are you training us on social media? We'll train you. You're the old guy. We'll train you. But there's the rules of engagement for social media where, audiences and sponsors can be completely unforgiving. One misstep could be a ruined career. Forget about what goes on the field. Forget about being injured or not. One bad step, you're toast.
It happened this week.
Right. It continues to happen. It's gonna happen every week.
That statement is going to be accurate indefinitely, but it literally happened. You know, a driver lost his ride because of something he said, and you know, it doesn't even matter what he said. It was enough that, you know, it bumped him out of his multi-million-dollar a year job, and maybe he gets another shot, maybe he doesn't. You know,
Yeah, it's so sad, but it's, we never before, so that's another thing. I mean, it's harder now, right? We
right?
talk about, people who've been in the business for a while, like I have. I won't speak for you, Pete, but I have.
Right.
Where, we remember the days before digital, before social. It's never been easier because you could speak direct to an audience, right? I can pick up my iPhone and I could speak to X million people with just a few thumb strokes, right? And so it's never been easier, but it's never been easier to blow yourself up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so it's kind of it's a two-edged sword where
Yeah.
you have access to audiences. You used to have to go through the media, right? You used to have to convince a reporter to write a story, and
Yeah.
now you could go straight to audiences, but you could go audience to an audience and really end your career as again as you mentioned, and we saw this week.
One of the things that's happening too is because of, like, we'll use my show as an example, but there are, I don't know, let's just say the word 750, 750,000 podcasts out there. And let's say that 10% of them have a significant audience that's marketable, even if it's just a nano audience. They're nano influencers, not macro influencers. You know, like my show. If you come on and you're selling a book, you're going to sell books. Like, it's just, you know, you're just gonna. So when we look at these things, major brands want to get in front of. How about these guys that are on Twitch playing video games, you know, and just have incredible influence? But how do you break them out of that game console closed world and get them out so that they can be sponsored by Lexus or whoever it is? Because it makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't make $8 million a year sense. It makes, like, here's a steady stream of income, you know, like less than even like professional skateboarders might earn, you know, for wearing something or using a board. Like, we're talking smaller money, but that audience is really stuck to that creator.
Yeah, it's amazing because we've been working in esports now for a while, and the interesting thing about esports is it's tracking now the trajectory of other traditional sports. So, for example, I recognize esports is like motorsports back in the '90s, and so what you have is you have a fantastic product, right? I mean, we've been playing video games. I've been playing video games since I got one of the first consoles in 1979, right? The Magnavox Odyssey. And so you have this history of playership, Atari, Commodore, then, obviously with Xbox and PlayStation changed the game. So you have in the United States, you have 160 million people play video games, right?
Wow.
What 3 out of every 4 households have at least one gamer in it, whatever it is, on a phone, on a console. But then esports kind of in the last over 20 years became a thing. It's now really a thing. But just like motorsports didn't quite know how to turn the sport into a business, you have esports now learning how to become a mass mainstream sport
Wow.
with mass
Yeah.
mainstream revenue potential. So streamers, for example, might have made thousands, tens of thousands. Now they're learning to make, and they have to learn how to make this hundreds of thousands. Some like Ninja, are making millions in terms of the streaming and appearances and all these different things. So it's not automatic. You can't just turn a switch on and be able to monetize what you do. But esports is a super interesting example because it's a really compelling product. I love esports for what it is. And they're really coming of age in terms of selling sponsorship and their athletes being endorsed and sponsored and really trying to and making a proper living with it. And another thing, an esports player now, a really good one, the average salary is like $250,000.
Wow.
So it's like if you're a parent looking at your kid thinking he or she is wasting their time playing, one of the great games, it's like, well, maybe aim them towards professional esports and they might make more than you are.
I mean, you think about this. If you have your kid on a baseball track, right, and they're out and they're playing all the time, maybe one kid in that community will go and play in the minor leagues and make well less than 250K. And you can spend $250,000 easy shepherding that kid through a 15 or a 12 or 10-year little league style career between coaches. And easy to do $250,000. So easy to do. Or you can be like, here's a paddle, here's a TV, here's some Doritos. I'll see you in 10 years.
Yeah, Pete, I didn't spend $250, but I had 10 years in soccer with one son and 10 years in baseball with another son. And
it ain't cheap.
And it ain't cheap, and you're chasing a scholarship that might be what, $10,000-$20,000 a year, maybe. Right. Yeah. That's the kind of dynamic of youth sports, the kind of sometimes that's upside down. But yeah, just give them, invest that money in that latest Xbox and the latest game for it. And you never know, right? They might be buying you that Mercedes you've always dreamed of.
I mean, we really are, as parents in this era, we are the angry old man. It's like, baseball's not a career. Hauling milk cans is a career.
Yeah, I've tried not to do that, right? I actually have clients who who are kind of contemporaries of mine who say, ESports, how is that a sport? How is playing video games a sport? Because they're thinking like we did kind of growing up, like what the traditional stick and ball sports are. But yeah, it's very much a sport. And when I was at for the Overwatch finals at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, and watching like 20,000 people, a sold out arena, stand up and scream, right, for the players playing in the finals, it's a sport. So it's like, I don't really care what age. You better open your mind to what's going on because the world changes every day. The question is, are you on top of it or are you getting dragged along behind?
Hey, man, we're about at an hour. What should I have asked you that I've missed on? What do you want to tell us?
Yeah, I think that if I look at sponsorship and kind of what our mission is kind of that everyone should experience sponsorship because of the benefit it brings to audiences and fans, the benefit it brings to businesses, and the benefit it brings to sports and not-for-profit properties. And so the one thing we'd encourage people to do is just check it. It is one form of marketing. It's been around a long time and it's very popular. I would just encourage your listeners just to check it out. If you're a business and you're looking to grow your business, if you're a property looking to sell sponsorship, but you've never done it before, all I'd suggest is check it out, go slowly, learn as much as you can. For example, we have free resources on our website at chargesponsorship.com. If you go to the insights page, there's all this free stuff about how to get involved in sponsorship. That's all I would encourage people to do is check it out as one of the opportunities in marketing to get your name out and sell more things.
Well, listen, I appreciate it. That's great advice. Go to chargesponsorship.com. Go to the insights part, learn all about it. Ken and these guys are also link up with Ken on LinkedIn. He's right there. And I know he'll talk to you because he's talking to me. So just go out there and do it. And as always, just support these folks because they're doing good work. And, I just can't thank you enough, Ken, for coming on and having this. It's a real fun chat. I mean, it was super easy. We talked about sports for an hour. How fun is that?
Exactly. Well, Pete, as a longtime listener and a first-time guest, I want to thank you. I had a blast. Thank you.